both John and Emmanuel have made the point that an act of editing is an act of interpretation. And there are further layers of interpretation that we can put on this, and that was also briefly alluded to by Emmanuel, which is annotation. And that is what I want to talk about now, is different ways to annotate our text. So epigraphical text, but any sort of text as well. And that can be done digitally. And the objective of that, of course, is to tell our audience what our thought process is when we are approaching a text or an object, right? So we have to explain, this is, in the case of an epidoc edition, you will say, this is my thought process and I'm 70% certain about this, right? And that's what you're telling your audience. With annotation, it is the same. I'm going to tell my audience, well, I'm interpreting this word as a genitive, and I'm interpreting this word as meaning this. I'm interpreting this place as the Thebes in Egypt and not the Thebes in Greece, and all of these kinds of disambiguations. So how can we do this? I'm going to present some experiments that we are running currently at Perseids, which is a sub-project of the Perseids Digital Library. So as you know, I'm the associate editor at Perseids and the project director of Perseids. So I will present some of the various annotation techniques that we have been working with. So what are the objectives? We want a data-driven analysis, right? So unlike a print annotation, I want something that goes straight back to the source for full transparency. So my data is always exposed, and that's precisely actually what I'm putting forth as my interpretation. It is my data, and the way I organize it, the way I present it, is part of my analysis. The results are therefore reproducible, so my audience can go back to the data, can go straight back to the source and reproduce the results or not. And if the audience disagrees, there is a space to do that. So all of that is part of a data-driven analysis. The data that's produced is also machine actionable, meaning that a computer can read it, a computer can aggregate it to further data, a computer can parse it, can do all kinds of other things with it. And the data sets are reusable. So as you know, the Perseids Digital Library is open access, open source, so is Perseids. So all of the data that we put forth is completely freely available, and it is also freely available for reuse, meaning that anyone can download the whole of Perseids and the whole of Perseids and reuse the codes for their own, the codes and the data for their own purposes. So, sample annotation workflows. These are just some of the workflows that we've put together, and these are going to be, I think, the most relevant to this particular audience. So we're going to talk about social networks, since the Visible Words program this year is about prosopography. This is going to be very relevant, and Laurent is going to talk about that also in his own context. So we will look at that. Time maps are another way of doing georeferenced information. So there are timelines associated with geographical information. So they give us an idea of the evolution of things geographically and chronologically in one view. Tree banks are morphosyntactic commentaries on text. So they tell us, I am the editor of this text and I understand this word as being such and such case. I understand this word as having such and such grammatical function, and therefore this is why I arrive at the result that you see on the page. And finally, textual alignments, which are a way to ground translations into the source text and justify them for our audience. So as you can see, all of these annotations, annotation types are ways to justify our interpretations, and they're also ways to expose our thought process. And that really is the point I want to make. So let's get started with timelines and time maps. So I will show you a lovely example that my colleague Valérie Toilon put together. Valérie was studying mosaics, which have spinning motifs on them. And she wanted to know where do these motifs come from, and how can we track their evolution, how can we track the evolution of the styles, and also can we figure out a spread in terms of geography. So she starts, we are here in the classical period, and so we have a brief description, and we also have georeferencing. Hold on, if I move, if this will let me, I will move. Okay, so this is where the basilica in question is located. Now, it's because I was at the end, I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay. So, we're going to start here instead, in the classical period for real. So, in the Terme du Centaure, which is located on there, and so we can, there's the Gorgoneion, and you can move through the different instances, and we know that there are very few, right, in the years before the turn of the millennium, and then suddenly we start getting more and more and more as we go, and we also get a different geographical spread. We're moving into North Africa and in this case Britain and so on. So this visualization allows us to track a particular graphic motif through time and through space. So this is particularly useful when you have a large set, for instance, of comparable data, right? So it's very important if you're going to do this that you be comparing oranges to oranges. You don't want to introduce variation there. We are planning on doing this for lists of magistrates, right? So who is magistrate at what year, and what are their social connections and local connections as well. So that's one visualization, and this actually is very simple from a technical standpoint. The user really doesn't have to do much. This is powered actually by a Google spreadsheet. This is what's behind this visualization. So you create a Google spreadsheet with the title of each slide, the dates. This is a free field, so this is where you put your interpretation or whatever question it is you are answering, and then the information where to find the media and the place. What is very interesting is this. We are putting geographical coordinates, right, to reference, to do the georeferencing. And those coordinates are found from the Pleiades Gazetteer. And so that is a stable identifier for the place locations. So this is a way to annotate a set of data that otherwise would be presented in a way that's not readily understandable, or that's not visually too attractive either. So this is what we do with those spreadsheets in Perseids. Now, I have a visualization and I have the data in a Google spreadsheet. What if I want to do other things with that? What if I want to aggregate my mosaics with, I don't know, vases that have similar patterns on them? What if I want to see what type of monuments these mosaics are found in, right? Are they in basilicas? Are they in, I don't know, fora, etc.? So I can aggregate that data and make it accessible to be put in larger sets. So Perseids ingests this data and puts it into standardized formats, making it readily accessible for anyone who wants to download this. So you have an example of what that looks like. Making it machine actionable is the point I want to make. Let's talk about social network and named entities, which has been mentioned repeatedly in the course of this workshop. So we want to know who the persons are in a specific text, and what are the places that are being mentioned, or where do these people come from, etc., etc., right? So once again, we're going to build machine actionable data sets, and we are going to make that data reusable for visualization, but also for aggregation to other data sets, and we also make it available for querying. So what does that look like? I want to give you an example that we just put together for my mythology class. I happen to be a specialist of Greek religion, so I teach mythology a whole lot. And this is one thing we did. My students were annotating the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Biography and Mythology, which is available on Perseids. And here we have the entry on Penelope, and the students were asked to annotate the personal names and the place names in each entry. The process to do that is very simple. We use the Hypothesis, which is a very lightweight web browser application. It simply will tag a term in very, very simple terms. You get to just have a little post-it note that appears on your screen, and you put a tag. So in this case, for instance, you see that Icarius has been tagged here as the father of Penelope, and Periboia. Information is super easy to enter. I would like to note that these tags are controlled, and John was making the point that you want to limit, You want to limit what your user inputs in order not to have error being introduced. That's precisely what we did. We gave the students an ontology. They had a set of tags that they could put, and they could not put anything else. So for instance, father had to be capitalized just like that. If they wrote father with a minuscule f, that would not work. And if they wrote, I don't know, friend, that would not work either, right? So it has to be put in this way to get the proper, to get a consistent data set. Now, that data gets ingested to Perseids in the form of triples, and here's the lovely visualization that we made. And my point with showing you this data is the point I was making earlier, that it is now in a standardized format and available for querying. But if you want something that is human readable, you go to the visualization, which is the following. So here, for instance, as you can see, I have my entry. This is the one on Andromache. I have the entry from the dictionary. And this is the result of the student's annotations. So there's Andromache in the center of her own network. And we see that she's related to Hector, she's related to Aetion, who's her father, Astyanax, who is her son, and so on. Now, all of this tells us a lot about who Andromache is related to. Very interestingly, we note that her network is very limited. If you compare with her husband, Hector, he's got a lot more friends or enemies. Right? So this tells you a lot, first of all, about the structure of the narratives, but also Greek social mores. We can also look at the full network, everyone who's being mentioned here. And as you can see, this is just part of it. Actually, it continues into the corner, and it's actually going away from view for some reason. So here's the full network that we have created here, which tells us who is related with who. And actually, one of the very interesting things we notice is that the connecting point between these figures is Zeus, right? So you have all of these star-shaped graphics with Zeus in the middle. So that was an interesting finding. And if we think about place, as you can see, the visualization gives me the statistics of where, how many times a place is mentioned. So I note that Ithaca, for instance, occurs only once, but I have many other mentions of other places. So if I look at Troy, for instance, I've got several mentions. Let's look at Thebes. So if I click on Thebes, I'm going to see who is present in Thebes, right? And so that actually gives me the entry on Oedipus and the royal family of Thebes, which happens to be the only one that's annotated just yet. But eventually, when more entries are annotated, we will have everybody who's present in Thebes, what are their relationships, and so on. So as you can see, this is useful to the researcher in terms of, right, I'm writing an article on Andromache. I'm going to look up who she's related to, what places she's going, and so on and so forth. If I'm doing this for an inscription, let's say I have a list of magistrates and I want to know who they are, what are their relationships. Are some tied by blood ties? Are some enemies? Are some allied for war or for political reasons, etc., right? So I'm going to track all of these connections in this way. Like I said, that's the visual.
Yes. Fortunately, we have one.
Yes, of course. So this is the visualization. As I said, the data that's behind it is what gets queried and also gets re-put in different visualizations, right? We chose to do it this way for the particular purposes of this project. We have the data now and we can visualize it in a number of other ways. So for instance, I could have done a traditional genealogical tree, right, in generations, very square and so on, which does not do what I want to do for now, right? But it could. Let's say I'm just working on the royal family at Thebes. I want to know who's the grandfather of whom and how that worked through the generation. In this case, I wanted a 3D network, right, where we can see how these various networks interact with one another. So this is something that goes into the design of a project, right? You have the data, but the questions you're asking are going to drive the visualization you choose to put and also the annotations you're going to make, right? So you're going to have a consistent view of what it is you're trying to achieve. So that's for the social networks. I want to talk about tree banks. So let's give you a live tree bank. And Michelle, you're going to recognize this one. So, yes,
coming back.
This is an inscription, right? It is the epitaph of a bronze smelter named Socinus. And as you can see, it says, Nema dikaiosines, hexophorosines, aretes Socino, estes an Perseids apoftimeno. Okay, so I read this inscription. It's in Greek, and I have to think, how am I going to interpret this, right? My audience, I can't assume that they're going to have the same interpretation as I do, and I have to justify that interpretation. So what the tree bank allows me to do is precisely that, is tell my audience every case, number, and gender, tense, mood, etc. for verbs of all the words, and most importantly, express the relationships among them. So you can see that in this case, I have set up estesan as a verb, the main verb, and paides is the subject, right? So the children of Socinus, who is dead, have set up what? A mnema, so a monument. And this mnema is of dikaiosines, sophorosines, areteste, so of justice, temperance, and excellence, right? That's personally my preferred way to read this. And as you can see, if I click on any word, I made the choice, right? So the parser that underlies this gave me different choices of what this word could be. You could also insert your own if you're not satisfied with the automated results. Now I have also inscribed a relationship, so I decided that paides was the subject. Now, let's say somebody had a different interpretation. let's say that they wanted to say that the justice and temperance and excellence were of Socinus. They could express it this way, right? And that would be their tree. I would go and critique it, but that's okay, right? That's the point. They could also decide that this doesn't go like that, but that rather there's a genitive absolute here, modifying the verb. I also disagree with this reading, but they could decide that, right? And so they would express it in this way, and you would actually have to change here the relationship. You would install Socino as attribute and actually flip apostymeno. That doesn't matter. My point is that here you have expressed with a degree of precision that is impossible in print just because of the lengthy explanations that that would take. You have expressed with one visualization your whole understanding of that sentence. And I want to show you what's underneath it all. So, if I go back into the Perseids interface, we have a good old XML document underneath this, right? Which is expressing, in this case, all the relationships between these words. So, for instance, I have here aretes, which is in a relationship, and I've said that it is genitive, singular, feminine, and I've decided that its relationship was as an object, and it is being coordinated with chi, etc., right? So all of these relationships are expressed in the clearest possible sense in that XML file, which can then be aggregated, it can be visualized in different ways, it can also be queried, right? So we have right now the whole tree banks of Homer. So you can query how Homer uses genitive absolutes. You can query where grammatically such and such a formula appears. I've been working on enjambment, so I can query where and when enjambment occurs and what is the relationship between enjambment and grammatical structures, which is very important if you're studying enjambment. So these are some of the ways to annotate to create that tree bank. You have shown your audience what your thought process was in interpreting that sentence. And as I've said, they can absolutely disagree with you, and they can also view the history. So John was talking about keeping your audience apprised of all of the history. So I have no comments on this particular one, but all of the history of the of that publication, right? So there's updates and so on and so forth. If it were collaborative, you could see which user made what changes, and you could see the comments that have been made. So if my audience says, I disagree with you that this is a genitive absolute, it would appear there, right? Or we could have alternative trees. So the three that I showed could be shown as alternatives. So that's for the tree bank. And finally, when it comes to translation, we have the same problem, right? So when you publish a translation, you make decisions on what something means. And that decision is informed, of course, by your parsing of that sentence, which you have documented in your tree bank, right? So you've decided, I treat this as a compliment, and therefore I'm going to translate it as a compliment. And hopefully, actually, there is that correspondence. There are actually times where things differ, and that's a big problem in a translation, right? In terms of reliability. So this is the next step. After doing your tree bank, you're going to justify your translation. And actually, we note here that this doesn't reflect the first tree bank that I had, right? And so this would have to go with tree bank number 2, the monument to his justice, and so on, right? So that's important to keep in mind. The two need to be aligned. How does a translation alignment work? It's super easy. So you click on the word in the original language that you want to a line. In this case, I'm going to use dikaiosune. Here's justice. And I'm going to re-click on dikaiosune to confirm that. And now I have created a link between the two, right, which will light up as I go. I've already aligned monument, and I can align several words. So for instance, estesan actually corresponds to both words, right? Set and up. And I'm going to create that link here. So, super easy process. You save it, and once again, underneath this, we have an XML file. And I can use that, of course, for querying or for aggregating. So for instance, I could search how do people most often translate sophrosynes in such and such a context, etc., right? So you could find these different correspondences. So these are, as I said, some of the ways that we can annotate. And many of these are, of course, born digital. This is not imitating a process that we have in print. This is something that used to be in our brains that now we actually can express in a way that is machine readable and human readable, right? So we have made it available for our audience to process and to reprocess with machines as well. So I will keep this brief, and so I will make an end now and ask you if you have any questions, comments, reactions. John.
Marie-Claire, going back to your mapping
Yes.
and Thebes in particular.
Yes.
Of course, there are lots of Thebes in the ancient world.
Sure.
And how could one in this system deal with ambiguity of a Thebes mentioned, and it's unclear what Thebes is referred to as a hometown of character X.
Right. So this is interesting. So since this came from the article on Oedipus, right, the annotator has interpreted it quite correctly, in my opinion, as the Thebes in Boeotia. But in order to disambiguate, right, they got the coordinates from the Pleiades Gazetteer, which is not opening right now, but this is where that mapping comes from. And Pleiades fully disambiguates Thebes in Egypt, Thebes in Boeotia, and whatever other Thebes might exist.
If you had an inscription like Sozonos, and Sozonos of Thebes, and
Sure.
found out of context, so you're not sure which Thebes.
That's
it's
right.
referred to. Could you tag it as Thebes, possibly Boeotia, possibly Egypt, or wherever else?
Yes. So in the annotation process, actually, you would give it two alternate tags, and the visualization would show the two alternatives. Yeah. And that occurred actually with alternative fathers. Yeah. Right, or mothers in mythology. That's very common. And the next step that we're going to do with this particular project is put the attestations. So you'll be able to see, so Apollodorus says that his mother is so-and-so, and right. Lycophron says that, right? So absolutely you would be able to see alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes?
Something that struck me when you showed the star
Yes.
Visualizations and the attention to the grammatical parts. I haven't seen that, frankly, since the diagramming of sentences, which did occur, I know in my training, and I never got away from it in my own thinking. And I'm amazed, and actually that feels really positive, that there's the potential for that attentiveness. Again, I would expect it in a print version if it's significant. I mean, that's part of what a commentary ought to be. But here it's kind of forcing your hand, it seems to me. And I really liked that.
Yes, and this is a point that John made earlier about epidoc encoding. This is the same principle where you're forcing a very high degree of precision and granularity, right? And I will tell you that's a very powerful way to teach Greek and Latin. We actually do that in our classes at Tufts, right? So, and I have colleagues who do it actually from the very first day of Greek and Latin instruction. They start with a tree, and they have usually 3 parts, right? So verb, object, and subject, and they do a tree of that, and then they'll add So what it is really explaining to our student, first of all, you have to understand every word. And we all know that in teaching language, it's the little ones that get the students. The big ones are not that big a problem, but the tes and the, right, and all those words starting with QU in Latin, they tend to cause all kinds of mischief. But if you put them in a tree bank, you have to know what it is. You can't fudge it. And it's the same thing when you're doing your translation alignment. You have to know what it is, and you can't fudge it once again, right? So this is one way to really get into the language, and what I have found is that it makes students feel very empowered. They are in control of this, and they can show exactly how it is that they understand the sentence, just like the scholar can show exactly what their interpretation is. And you can show alternatives. So I have friends who are textual critics, and they will make aggregations of different manuscripts, and therefore the tree actually allows them to say, well, lesson A actually does not work in the tree bank, right? Grammatically, there's a problem. So you can show it at a glance, and therefore I prefer lesson B, which says blah, blah, right? So these are all ways that we can express with a high degree of precision and support from the source, right? So thank you.